All right, class, welcome. Go ahead and settle in. Today, we're going to roll up our sleeves and dive right into our very first machine learning lab session. Seriously, we're going to go from just a simple question all the way to a working prediction model. So, let's get started. You know, every good experiment starts with a question. And this one right here, this is ours. It's the whole hypothesis for today's project. Can just a single data point, in our case, a patient's BMI, actually be used to predict how their diabetes will progress over a whole year? It's a pretty simple idea, right? But the answer, well, it might just surprise us.
Now, before we can start any experiment, we absolutely have to understand our materials. You know, in a chemistry lab, that means knowing your chemicals. Well, in our digital lab here, it means getting to know our data. And remember, these aren't just numbers, they represent real people.
The foundation of our entire project is a data set from a real diabetes study. And the scale we're working with today, it involves 442 individual patients. Every single one provides a data point that's going to help our model learn.
Okay, so for each of those 442 patients, we actually have 10 different measurements. You know, things like age, sex, and blood pressure. But to keep our first project nice and focused, we're going to zero in on just two columns. The patient's BMI, which is going to be our input, and that disease progression number, which is the outcome we're trying to predict.
So let's move on to the main event, actually assembling our model. Now, I know this might sound complicated, but don't worry. We're going to break it down into a super straightforward 4-step process. Just think of it like a recipe or a blueprint. Here it is. This is our roadmap. First, we'll isolate the specific data we need. Second, and this is crucial, we'll split that data into a training set for our model to learn from and a test set to grade it later. Third, we'll train the model. And finally, number 4, we'll use it to make some predictions. Let's tackle step 1.
So, like we said, our full data set has 10 whole columns of information for each patient. To keep things really simple and clear for our first model, we are going to extract just one of those columns, the one that corresponds to body mass index. This focus is really key to understanding the basic mechanics of how this works.
All right, this next step is honestly one of the most important concepts in all of machine learning. We can't use all our data to teach the model. And you might be asking, why not? Well, because then we'd have no way to fairly grade its performance. So we'll use about 2/3 of our patient data for training, the study material, and we'll hold back that last third for a surprise final exam.
Let's really break that down. The training data, it's like an open book test. The model gets to see both the patient's BMI and the final disease progression. It uses all of that to learn the connection. But the test data? That's the final exam. The model only gets to see the BMI and has to predict the outcome all on its own. This is what prevents it from just memorizing the answers and proves it actually learned the pattern.
All right, it's study time. We feed the training data, so both the BMIs and their real outcomes, to our model. The model's whole job is to analyze all of those examples and find a reliable pattern. Essentially, it's trying to figure out the mathematical relationship between a patient's BMI and their disease progression.
Okay, the model has been trained, it's reviewed the study guide, it thinks it understands the material. Now for the moment of truth. It is time to hand out that final exam, that test data that it has never, ever seen before.
Here we go. We take the BMIs from our test group of patients, we feed them into our trained model, and we ask it, based on everything you've learned, what do you predict the disease progression will be for these people? The model then spits out a list of its best guesses.
The predictions are in. Now it's time to get out the red pen and grade the exam. This is the part where we compare our model's guesses to the actual real-world outcomes for the patients in our test group. Let's see how it did.
This is the ultimate comparison, the showdown. On one side, we have the ground truth, what really happened to these patients after a year. These are the correct answers. And on the other side, we have the numbers our model just generated. It's educated guesses. The closer these two columns are, the better our model performed.
So, how do we actually read this chart? As you can see, each little black dot is a real patient from our test set. The blue line, that represents our model's prediction. Now, the goal is for that line to capture the general trend of the dots. And as you can see, it does. Yeah, the line doesn't hit every single dot perfectly, but it cuts right through the middle of the data. That means our model successfully found the relationship.
And that really is the key takeaway for our first project. No model is perfect, especially not a simple one like this one. Our predictions aren't going to be spot on for every single patient. But what we've successfully done is create a model that understands and represents the general relationship in the data. That as BMI goes up, so does the measure of disease progression. So we've built a successful model using just one factor, which leads us to a final and pretty exciting question to think about. If we were able to find a real predictive trend using only a patient's BMI, what do you think we could achieve if we gave our model all 10 measurements to learn from? That right there, that's the power of this technology, and that's where you're all headed next. Great work today.